Greetings, enlightened viewers, and welcome to another episode of Roll Off a Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Zendexor, and my fellow literates are Nikita Zuev, who alas is invisible this afternoon, and XJ. On this occasion, we shall be discussing Guyal of Sfere by the great and fortunately long-lived author Jack Vance, who was born in 1916 and died in 2013. Before we get down to the discussion, I shall summarise the story. Guyal of Sfere is a youth who was born with a craving for answers. He cannot stop asking questions about what, why, when, and how. Awkwardly for him, he lives in the far future scenario of Jack Vance's dying Earth, the cultures of which have been soaked in magic for thousands of millions of years, so that knowledge is purely empirical and nobody cares a fig for rational investigation. Presently, his father tires of being plagued by Guyal's questions and equips him to go in search of the one possible source of answers, the Curator of the Museum of Man, which antique legend places in the land of the falling wall. The father says, and I quote from the story, "I will bestow on you my fine white horse, my expansible egg for your shelter, my scintillant dagger to illuminate the night. In addition, I lay a blessing on your trail, and danger will slide you by so long as you never wander from the trail." Thus equipped, Guyal sets off into the unknown. No authority holds unified sway in these latter days of our world under its dying sun. On his quest, Guyal survives one unpredictable adventure after another as he encounters the sinister and the eerie denizens, human and inhuman, whose lands are crossed by his trail. Ironically, in view of his thirst for knowledge, he survives more by instinct than anything else, that's to say, by following his hunches, especially in the extraordinarily creepy episode of the ghost town of Carcassel and the witch Ameth. Eventually, he reaches a town where he is told that the Museum of Man is just a few miles further to the north. But just as he approaches his goal, the townsfolk trick him into leaving the trail, and so he loses the advantage of his father's protective spell. The town has an arrangement reminiscent of the tribute paid by the ancient Athenians to King Minos. In Guyal's case, he and the fairest local maiden are compelled to go north to the museum, there to meet an unknown fate from which none of the former victims have ever returned. So, the long-sought museum turns out to be a sinister place. It is underground and is now the haunt of a bloated ectoplasmic demon called Blikdak, who appears as a huge face, while the museum's curator dodders around in a dreamlike state of illusion, his consciousness living in the past. Guyal and the maiden nevertheless manage, by great ingenuity, to revive the curator and defeat Blikdak. The curator's revival accelerates his life processes so that he swiftly dies, bequeathing the museum to Guyal and the maiden. The tale hauntingly ends on a note of puzzled wonder. Its last lines read, "Guyal, leaning back on the weathered pillar, looked up to the stars. Knowledge is ours, Sheol, all of knowing to our call, and what shall we do? Together they looked up at the white stars, what shall we do?" End of story. Well, I've got a lot to say about this, but I'd like to listen to what my co-hosts say, so I'll pass the question on to my invisible colleague, Nikita.
Hello. Well, thank you very much. First of all, dear viewers, I want to apologize for the fact that I am in my ghostly form today, completely invisible. Um, Sometimes life gives you lemons and you must make lemonade. So, in order to bring you a new episode, some things had to be sacrificed. And I have sacrificed my body for you. You heard it here first. No, really, I'm just in a hotel currently, and there's no way that the signal would work if you saw my face as well. The Wi-Fi simply cannot handle it. As far as the magnificent story that we read this week, or a couple of weeks, let us say, because I've read it this week and also the week before that and a couple of weeks before then. This is my first foray into Jack Vance verbatim. I have never read any of his tales. I have his book due to Robert's recommendations, but I actually didn't open it until we had to do it for the podcast, which I deeply regret because this tale has a lot of very interesting aspects to it. Now, I do have some criticisms. I wouldn't be me if I didn't, right? But for the most part, I currently want to talk about what I like about the story. Firstly, it has a really great theme, a theme that is timeless. You can really put any character in any setting in the same shoes as Guyal of Sfere, and it will make sense. It could be a modern drama, it could be a sci-fi saga, it could be a fantasy story, it could be a horror story, but a story about a young mind wanting to know more and being unsatisfied with what he currently has is a timeless idea. And it is fantastically illustrated by Jack Vance in this short tale. You can clearly see why Guile of Sphere wants these answers. This void that is spoken of myriad of times within the tale that he wishes to fill is something that is common to almost every human being. We always strive to know something. We always strive to become better, to learn, to adapt, to react better. And Guile represents that will, that human aspect of us all greatly. He is not just a vehicle for this type of story, though. He is also very cunning, and we see his cunning aspects come out in a great many ways. Firstly, with his encounter with the faith dealer, the my dear colleagues, help me. What is the name of the?
Yoga,
Yeah,
yoga,
the genau.
yeah,
Exactly. Correct. Right.
yeah.
Yes, the fortune teller.
Mm.
He realizes a thing or two quite quickly. Even though he has never encountered anything like this, his first question is, where do you get all these you know these prophecies? How do you get them um, to you? What method do you use? And as soon as that is put towards the fortune teller, he crumbles. He realizes that this is no ordinary kid. He's smart, right? He's not going to be fooled by this murmur's tale. And he continues to do so. And ever so often, whenever he does something super smart within the tale, I praise Jack Vance and I think to myself, wow, how much of literature that I've read had characters that were so stupid that I would just forgive them really bad ideas. And I would even say, well, humans are not perfect. Therefore, this makes sense that a character would do something stupid in this instance. But Jack Vance creates moments within the tale where you can both completely understand where Guile is being completely and utterly rational and therefore quite smart, but also moments where he shows his childlike side, like when he's super annoyed um, at the villagers who are asking him to pay penance, right? He doesn't figure out that the scam itself is much more foreboding than than just a simple prank upon him, right? When he is speaking to the villagers and they ask him to pick the fairest of the maidens, right? Although he understands that there is some second nature to this, he does not realize quite how dangerous this whole situation is, because there's no way that somebody who has done something terrible in the eyes of this culture would have a punishment of choosing the most beautiful woman, right? So although he knows that that's kind of weird, he doesn't fully understand what kind of situation he's in, and it's believable, right? And there are so many other moments. I mean, I don't want to go one by one through the story where you just feel like, man, this is a real guy. This is a real guy we're following, and he's making these real decisions that are both smart in some ways and quite risky and perilous in others. The magic, quote unquote, within the tale, which from what I understand after I started reading online reviews and just watching what people say about the story and the Dying Earth series, for some reason people say this is fantasy, and I don't understand why this is classified as fantasy by most individuals. To me, this is apocalyptic sci-fi. This is forgotten technology sci-fi. This is nowhere near magic. I don't really understand how it has become this in the pop culture. Perhaps maybe my colleagues might illuminate this fact, but I'll end my positives on this. The characters are believable. I want to see them continue. And for me, the ending, it wasn't actually haunting, like Robert said. For me, it was full of hope. It was full of wonder and opportunity. What will we do with this knowledge? What will be our future? It's in the hands of someone that I think will do well with it. It's in the hands of a smart kid who has a heart. It's in Guyal's hands. So for me, it was a very, very hopeful outlook upon the future. Even though everything else is crumbling, maybe there is a light. Maybe there is a way yet. Maybe we can be saved. There you go. So that's my, uh, combined positive thoughts about the Guyal of
Mm.
Sfere. What about you, actually? How did you feel about the tale?
Well, thank you for the very glowing review. Can't wait to see what your criticisms are, Nikki. Uh, I am reading Jack Vance is always a treat for me because I don't really play the tabletop gaming a lot, the RPG tabletop gaming a lot, but I am a huge D&D franchise fan. Uh, be in my youth at any rate, being deeply into Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms. So, reading Jack Vance, you come across certain things that immediately reminds you of D&D. It's not there's not so much of that in Guyal of Sfere, but the very first story of Jack Vance, you get things like one of the spells that the magicians cast is the excellent prismatic spray, and if you know what that is, then you know what that is. So it's always interesting to me to read any of Jack Vance's stories because I can see the beginnings of D&D. Uh, for this tale in particular, the I I I admire very much the skill in in Jack Vance's penmanship. It is very very powerful. I would say he's a master, much like Clark Ashton Smith, in the way he writes. Um, a different it's a different kind of style, but um, it's always very beautifully written. and I do enjoy just the way the prose is constructed. The the it does require a bit of patience, I would say, to read Jack Vance. It's not so it's not such a it's not such a clear and easy read. Uh, and it sometimes does require keeping in the mind certain things that happened before, and then before it is explained very much further down the road in the story. And and I I think my favorite description is possibly in the scene with the witch Ameth, uh, when they played the music. I think, let me see. Perhaps I can get a sample of that very beautifully written paragraph.
When as you're diving into try and find this paragraph, Robert, I have a simple question for you, if you don't mind answering. So
Yeah,
how did you read Jack Vance first? What was your introduction to his work, and how did it happen?
I think I was quite probably in my early teens, if not younger, and my mum bought me one of his science fiction books called Star King. And Star King is the first, and in my opinion, perhaps the best of his five Demon Princes novels, which are science fiction and have a revenge theme. The hero as a child was um, his parents were killed and his town destroyed by five supervillains, and in five books he goes after them one after the other. And
Oh, very cool.
yes, that was my introduction. It was a while before I knew him as a fantasy writer. I'm actually going to argue that in this he is a fantasy writer, so I'm disagreeing with you that far. But
Well, it
certainly,
wouldn't be an episode of a roll of a tangent if we didn't disagree on something, right?
yeah, yeah. Now, I'm sure you'll find in some of the other Dying Earth stories when you get round to reading them that there's no doubt about it that they are fantasy. They're full of magicians and spells and so on. But anyway, that was my introduction to Jack Vance.
Well,
Cool.
let's have a sample of a Jack Vance's writing. Guyal played a wild tarantella of the peasant folk, and Ameth danced wilder and faster, flung her arms, wheeled, jerked her head in a fine display, and Ludowig's flute played a brilliant obligato, hurtling over, now under, chording, veering, wrapping little silver strings of sound around Guyal's melody, adding urgent little grace phrases.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate the imagery and the description of the music there. It's really quite it's quite fine, and the all of the Dying Earth is littered with uh, gems like that. And if you are an appreciator of fine prose, Jack Vance will not disappoint. As for the story itself, um,
Yeah,
it's a little long for me, to be honest.
it's a little long for you. Okay.
Yeah, as in it's a little bit draggy for me. The scene in the library felt uh I think up to the subunits, just before the Museum of Men, everything was fine. But for some reason, the Museum of Men itself uh, did not really hook me as much as the rest of it. And I find it difficult to pin down an answer why, because one of the things that I really like about the Dying Earth series is how It's how imaginative the world building is. Really, that's a feverish and fragmentary fairy tale like vibe to it that I really appreciate. Uh, and when Jack Vance takes us through his dying Earth, not just through Guyal but also through Kujal the Clever. Uh, it's like going on into a, maybe I can say, a theme park. It's very fantastic.
Right.
It's very very vivid, but the museum scene itself just didn't really struck me all that much. It's hard for me to say why. I don't know, but yeah.
Mm,
All in
mm,
all, it's a great story. I love it.
mm, mm.
Cool. Yeah.
I would agree about partly agree with XJ about the museum scene. I think that the reason why it didn't completely come off was that very much this is very much the exception in Jack Vance, but there was some obscurity in the description of how the curator dealt with things. I think there
With
was
the rod, you mean?
yes. I found all that bit a little bit obscure. Now, it didn't matter to me because when I meet something a little bit obscure with an author I love, I simply glide over it.
Right,
Um,
right.
you know, but
Yeah.
I can understand how that might have put XJ off a bit. Just to pick up another of XJ's points about the music in the story, I'd like to say that Vance, in many of his books, I think in many of his books, is really shows he's keen on music, and particularly the Anome trilogy in his science fiction in his science fiction works. The Anome trilogy, the hero is actually a musician.
Interesting.
Yeah, I
Okay, so
think
I wanna add upon. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
sorry. Go on.
I wasn't quite sure if Jack Vance was a musician himself, but it did came across as him being familiar with it in any case,
Mm,
because just because of the way he describes music. Yeah.
mm, mm.
I
Yeah.
want to add on to the point that both of my colleagues have made, because this is one of my points of criticism actually, and then I'll move on to some other points that I have. But it's about the museum, the library, right? It's about the end of the tale. So in my
Mm,
opinion, I think I've voiced that multiple times in our on our podcast, that for me the end of the tale matters a lot. Actually, most stories that I like have an ending that I like. So, for example, A Warrior's Reward that we read, that beautiful tale about the adventurer who gets coerced, right? And at the end, we find out the depth of that coercion and his ultimate fate, right? That is such a striking ending that, despite some of my previous, um, you know, problems with the tale, it is outshined, right? Same with The Hero by George R. Martin. Now, while I understand that the story itself is not as good as what George R. Martin can write, it is absolutely astonishing when you realize that this whole situation has been decided from the start, that this guy's never going to get what he wants. And he was only being tested to see if he could still be used as an asset. And because he's now a liability, he is being disposed of, right? Same with The Tower of Ashes by the same author. The ending of that tale is magnanimous. It overshadows everything else that transpired and asks so many questions and doesn't answer them, that you yourself have to sit there and really think, which which story do you believe? Whose story? Do you have a third story that actually makes more sense that you came up with from reading it? And the one thing that Jack Vance's um, third act doesn't have for me is any true revelation, to be honest. Um, the the place itself is not that well described, as Robert said. There are many points in which it's actually a little bit too rushed for me, where they somehow get to this device and the device is somehow explained that's how it works, and then this device now solves everything, but oh no, Curator is dying, right? Like, if there is one moment in which you want to take your time, it's the ending. It's to slow burn the thing that we have been coming towards. And for me, Jack Vance, although a fantastic author, in this particular tale, I'll probably read more of his. But I can only judge this one because it's the only one I've read. The the proper time that was spent on all of those other centerpieces, um, that happened before with the witch, with the strange town, with the fortune teller, with the beginning of Guyal's life. A lot more detail and a lot more flavorful, delicious text is there than in the ending. It's almost like the tale runs out of steam for me there. And that is because of the hopeful nature of the ending. It's not as big of a problem as some of my other points, but still, it sort of it created for me this feeling of I've been I've been dining on something rather delicious, and then at the end, the dessert is just ice cream, right? I love ice cream. I've got nothing against it, but if everything else was like steak with beautiful raspberries, raspberry sauce that has been gleamed over it, and graze with beautiful Japanese garlic, and then the soup was made out of like squid parts, and um, has had some asparagus that has been curated for 48 days in order to be this right temperature and just that delicious within the combination of the seafood within the soup, and then ice cream, right? Like you jump to something that is quite mundane comparatively. Um, so that kind of created a strange juxtaposition.
Yeah, I would agree, except that there's one thing that runs counter to what you're saying, one exception, and that is the defeat of the demon Blickdak, which I think was most ingenious. The winding the thread, finding out that the ghosts are made of thread, and then, you know, using that fact to wind up the demon on a spool. I think that was brilliant.
It is a brilliant way to destroy the antagonist. I completely agree with you. But how do you say it? Um, you know, not a contradiction proves the rule, but what is it? An exception. An exception proves the rule. That thing shines so well, so brightly in that mundaneness. Whereas I think, like, if you think about the witch part that XJ spoke of, that also has a very ingenious way of ending that whole situation, right? But it's also fantastically flavored, right? So, but I completely agree. The thread from the ghost and the unwinding of the demon is a very genius. It is an ingenious idea.
Actually, to me,
So
that particular section is very well described, and I like the idea by itself in isolation. The only thing that struck me was why did Curlin, the curator, wait until Guyal of Sfere is there before he embarked on this ingenious scheme? I know he's mad. He has been mad for thousands and thousands of years, but there was surely a time before he went mad that he was sane. How was it that he did not light upon this scheme and had to wait till?
I think
that is a
yeah.
loophole. That is a loophole.
Yes, for sure, it is a loophole. A loophole that's very easily closed by the curator saying like, "Oh, I went mad right about the time when I was figuring out. Oh my God, I was figuring out the solution to this, and then I went mad." And the demon's like, "Oh no!" He's like starting to remember everything. This is terrible. And he's like, "Quick, I'm dying, but this is what you got to do, Guile." Right? Or something like that. Like again, it's a very easily closed loophole, but to me, it just seems like, okay, well, that means that Jack Vance spent less time on the ending than he spent on the other parts of the tale. This is just a theory, right? Obviously, but Exik, you were dying to know my criticism.
I thought we already started.
Yeah. I mean, this one is minor, to be honest. That there was like not enough
Yeah,
plays.
yeah. Tell us. I mean, I'll preface this by saying I really do enjoy Jack Vance's story, but I'm not a 100% fan of Jack Vance. So yeah, there are things
Hmm.
that didn't jive with me in the Dying Earth. Yeah, but I mean that's normal. So yeah, let's hear it.
All right. So first of all, I'm gonna put Robert into an impossible position right now. All right. So be ready for it. I'm about to what they call in chess, and I'm gonna put you into an end game, and it's gonna be impossible for you to escape. Right? We're
Mm.
either drawing or someone's losing. Right? So I think that there is a tale that we have reviewed that does Guyal of Sfere better than Guyal of Sfere, and it's called The End of the Story by your favorite Clark Ashton Smith.
Well, they're both a quest for knowledge in a way. I see that connection.
Let me continue further.
Yeah.
So something that you and I often agree upon. It's the idea that like this tale is good for what it set out to do and for the amount of words that it has been given. Now
Mm.
let's review how much Guyal of Sfere has and how much the end of the story has. The end of the story has less words, but I think it gets its points across much better than this one. And I'll explain why. Now they have a different theme in that, like, so in Clark Ashton Smith, knowledge is scary and is actually a bad thing, kind of, right? And in Jack Vance's Guyal of Sfere, it is a positive thing. But
Yeah.
outside of that contradiction, the actual journey of the character towards the knowledge, the pacing is my biggest issue with Guyal of Sfere. I completely agree with XG's part about it being somewhat bloated in some areas, which makes me wonder if some of the fat was cut out from the previous parts of the story, would the ending be better structured? But I'll explain this point by point, right? What happens in the end of the story? The in the French countryside, a certain nobleman is traveling through. He goes to the monastery, and he's coerced by knowledge and the monk living within to look through information that he shouldn't be looking at. And then the more he learns about the information, the more expansive and flavorful the tale becomes until we are literally put into the story of yesteryear, into ancient times, where our character gets to witness, something magnanimous, and then he is haunted by this thing in the current days and barely saved by the monk. After which he is haunted for the rest of his life and craves this knowledge. Right? In Guyal of Sfere, we have a man seeking knowledge. He gets to go on a journey, even though he talks about his father not really liking him. His father gives him basically everything that you could ever want on this journey. And then he goes on with relative ease and goes through perils that, for example, if we were reaching Conan the Barbarian, you would say like, okay, so he he might be getting into Conan territory worth of getting away with things, right?
Mm.
And it gets to the point where even a demon is basically a side story, because in this version it's Guile and his maiden that figure out the way to destroy the demon rather than the curator, right? And then the knowledge, the thing that we have been searching for this entire time, is saved for the end to say, well, we have it now. What should we do with it? Right? So you have a goal within the story that actually isn't achieved. And for me, the end of the story has both the journey towards the knowledge, its achievement in the middle, and the consequences of said knowledge, right? And I believe that Guile of Sphere really suffers from the fact that the main quest, the main thing that we're going for, is left off screen at the end. Now, I understand the message. The message is, well, he now has every knowledge, every possible information the humans had before. What is he going to do with it? But we didn't get to see any of it at work. We didn't see the demon being, destroyed by this old knowledge. It was the new ingenuity. We don't see Guile of Sphere over relying on the things that were given to him by his father. It's mostly him using his brain, using his know-how. So for me, the story suffers from saying the knowledge is power, but really showcasing that ingenuity is power, and that a smart mind that can use the situations of today is really what matters, and not knowledge. But then it ends with saying, well, this is what we have been all going towards knowledge, and now that we have it, what are we going to do with it? And that falls flat for me, right? Upon closer examination of the tale, that this is my kind of conclusion. I still like it, but this is kind of like my biggest criticism of it, that it doesn't actually do what it set out to discover. And the journey is actually Guile of Sphere becoming, an ingenious character through his own abilities, and not through any old knowledge.
Hmm. Well, in a way, that was my point in the introduction, that it's ironic that he survives by his wits, um, uh, uh, which is what you have to do in the dying earth, because it's all empirical. Knowledge is all empirical now. There's no theoretical uh, knowledge of any value left. So you just have to look out for one thing after another, and I think that fits in with the story's mood. And poor old Guile, with his yearning to understand, is a kind of fish out of water. But that's one of the points of the story.
I completely agree with you there, Robert. That is the point of the story. But then the story decides to end on the fact like, no, 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 it's knowledge. What are we going to do with it? Right? So you
Mm.
see what I mean? It's yes, you're completely right.
Well, I
Jack
think
Vance is saying that yes, it's all about the human spirit, the ingenuity, the power to overcome things because of your own smarts and wits. And
yeah.
then the story is all about him getting to knowledge, and then also reinforcing. If the end of the tale was like, I don't need any of this knowledge, I don't think it could help me more than my brain already has. We need to survive based on the current reality and not live like this curator. The end of the story is let's become the curators who will eventually go mad, I guess.
Yeah.
Like what is right? It's a bit strange.
Well, it's the trouble is that the story never quite makes clear whether by knowledge is meant simply knowledge of a lot of facts, or whether it is knowledge of how the facts interrelate. Sometimes it seems that Guile wants to know the reason for things, and sometimes the reason why, and sometimes it just appears that he wants to know what, which is a kind of lower level knowledge. And it's, I suppose one would have to look back to the beginning, the questions that he asked to his father, and it's a bit ambiguous. You could read it either way. He's either looking for understanding or he's looking for knowledge of facts. I don't know, but the overpowering mood of the story is, I think, what one has to judge it by. If Vance has succeeded in conjuring up the mood of the dying earth, however you might want to define it, then that's the kind of meat of the story.
I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that the the story fails at creating a good mood, or that it doesn't portray the universe well. I simply can't make these claims actually because this is the one Dying Earth tale that I've read, right? So I'll have to defer to you on that one. But my point is a little different. My point is the setup and the payoff match, but the middle doesn't, right? So the and the yeah. Sorry, go on. You were going to say something?
It's the middle is just Vance having fun. I think the as you say the beginning and the end match, and the middle is just having one adventure after another, and that's just fun, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is fun, right? But I'm just saying to you that, like, for me, structurally, the end of the story, right? Clark Ashton Smith, it
Mm,
has a beginning with with a
mm,
certain atmosphere. It proves the atmosphere inviting and interesting throughout the middle. It stays the same. The pacing is great, and
yeah,
then it ends with the same pacing and the same theming, and
yeah,
it's a very fulfilling story to read.
yeah.
For me, yeah,
Yeah, the end of the story is much more tautly constructed. It's an organic whole with, as you say, um, it's not a ramshackle tale like Guyal of Sfere is, but then again, the ramshackleness of Guyal of Sfere fits the shall we say semi-chaotic nature of the dying earth, whereas the end of the story is set in a medieval French province which doesn't require so much in the way of invention to make it believable. Clark Ashton Smith is not so much an inventor of new things as he is a splendid evoker of the kind of key ingredients in myth and story. Jack Vance is creating new myths, if you like.
sure,
Um,
yeah. Um, all right, so I'll give you a different example.
mm,
Another one that we how would I say reviewed, I guess, on the podcast, The Hour of the Dragon
mm,
by Robert E. Howard, the only novel of Conan the Barbarian. The story of that entire book is exactly this chaotic point A, point B, point C. Oh, I fell off. I'm at point F right now. I need to get to point G, H, right? He starts as a king. He has all his power slip away from his fingers. He goes back to his days of adventuring. He goes to all sorts of places. He even goes to Stygia. He sees and meets all these interesting characters. Every chapter is almost an adventure of its own, right? And that's what we liked about the story. But the the tale of Hour of the Dragon isn't the beginning is Conan the Barbarian is a scientist, and then the middle is all right, now he's a crazed barbarian who's destroying everything, and then part three, aka the ending, he's a scientist again, right? Now that is a very contrived way of looking at it, but what I'm trying to say is Jack Vance's story works separately. It works as beginning and ending, and it works as a story about the human ingenuity. But for me, the the connective tissue between the two is too um, too vague, right? Like I want the author's definitive word on what is your message. What are we trying to understand here? Are you saying that knowledge will make this ingenuitive man even better? Are you trying to say that no, actually his ingenuity got him into a lot of problems, and the
mm,
conductor with his knowledge showcased him that like no, at the end you still really need knowledge, and that's how we defeat the demon king? Are we saying that this knowledge is something we don't need because of human ingenuity and we have to live in the present? There isn't the statement and the story are different. The story is ingenuity is what will make you live through the dying earth, and it seems to me that that's the universe, as you said, right?
mm.
Like, and then the ending is knowledge will save us. So which one is it? right? Is it the middle of the story that I supposed to take as the lesson? Is it the ending of the story that I'm supposed to take as the lesson? And this clash soured the last few pages for me. After a second reading, on the first reading, I didn't notice any of this because I wasn't thinking about this critically, right?
Mm.
As soon as I started to think like, okay, what am I going to say on the podcast? I realized that there are these two inconsolable points because the story says two things at the same time, and for me, that's where it kind of falls apart,
Right.
right? So there you go.
I think I know what you mean about reading it first and just enjoying it, and then reading it for the second time and thinking critically. I think you've got to move on to the third kind of reading, whether it is actually the third reading or the millionth reading, I don't know. But the third stage of reading a story is to recapture the original sense of wonder that you had when you read it the first time, uh, but enhanced, as it were, by your subsequent readings. In other words, first of all, you read it and say, gosh, wow, boy, oh boy, this is great. Then you read it and say, oh, yeah, but. And then you read it
That does
again
sound like me.
and you say, oh, yes, I see. I was right the first time because all these bloody blah don't matter because they're not really the point. And I think that the knowledge issue, which you quite efficiently brought up just now, is actually it's a kind of prop. It's not really a a proper philosophical basis for the story. It's like lots of stories have a theme of religion, for example, as a prop, not real transcendent religion, but just like sort of weird priests in weird temples wearing funny hats and doing funny things, and it's just a
Yeah,
kind of colorful prop for the story. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
what this museum of man and all the knowledge is, because after all, the kind of knowledge obviously hidden in all these banks, he calls them banks, are they are just facts. They're just an accumulation of facts. There's no reason there's no reason to believe that they are actually powerful ideas. I
hmm,
think there's a good quotation I'm looking for here, but I think you know what I mean anyway. I'll have to find it. Um, so that's my take on that. I'd like to say that although I class this as a fantasy story, there is one bit which encourages one to look on it in science fiction terms, and that is, if I may just allude to um, it.
hold
Yes,
on. Oh, you found it? Okay.
yeah, I found it. Guyal indicated the seared area behind the fence of stone and timber. What is the portent of this devastation? The Saponid stared across the area with a blank expression and shrugged. It is one of the ancient places. So much is known, no more. Death lingers here, and no creature may venture across the place without succumbing to a most malicious magic which raises virulence and angry sores. In other words, that sounds like a radioactive area, doesn't it? Scene of an
Yeah.
ancient atomic war. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
although, really, the dying Earth is so old that you'd think the radioactivity would have died down by that time. But anyway, there you go.
Maybe those were super atom bombs where radioaction doesn't go away for thousands of
Mm.
years. Who knows?
But
But yeah,
as
actually,
for
okay.
in general, it's obviously fantasy with things like his father laying a blessing on the trail. There's no way you can invent uh, a scientific explanation for that unless it's very powerful auto-suggestion. But that wouldn't auto-suggestion can only get
Yeah,
you
I
so
mean, or it's just words of a father to his son who's leaving, right?
well.
I think there it's the blessing seems pretty solid. Like there are examples during the story itself where it seems to work. I think the Saponids, I think, could not really lay a hand on him until he is tricked off the path. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's like to me, a lot of that kind of stuff, a lot of mysticism, just like in Dune, for example, it's either explained away by psychic powers or it's explained away by like it's just people connecting dots where there are no dots, right? So I could go either way on it. I understand what you guys mean, right? It you could definitely read it as like, oh yeah, it is a blessing. But I kind of read it as like, Guile sort of connecting dots where there aren't any. What did you think of our discussion there, actually? You know, do you see any of my points? Do you agree more with Robert?
I'm kind of sitting in both. Because actually I agree with Robert that I don't feel any sort of theme that Jack Vance is trying to push in this particular story in Guyal of Sfere. I think it was just the quest for knowledge is just a MacGuffin. It was just to get Guyal on the road, and then Jack Vance just wants to take us through this particular section of the Dying Earth, and then just be a tour guide, tell us everything about this particular section. And so how the library ended, I think, was not. I'm trying to read his mind right now, which of course will always go wrong, but it very 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 much felt to me like the library itself was not the main purpose of the story, and that the journey from Squam, I think, through to the doorstep of the Museum of Man itself, that was the point of the story. That's how it read to me anyway. That's it though. Part of the reason why I said earlier that it requires patience to read, and that the whole thing felt very long to me, and that the museum part just fell flat, is I think because this is like watching a road trip movie like Paris, Texas, where it's 3 hours of really nothing that hangs together, and 3 hours of random stuff happening. And it's great if you could you could appreciate moments by moments within the movie itself, but I simply find it difficult to have the patience to watch 3 hours of nothing that really gels together. So in that sense, I kind of agree with you, like the short story itself is perhaps a little bit too fragmentary for my taste, and I would have preferred some structure in it. And I think that that would be a major criticism I have of the Dying Earth series, because I read till Cujo the Clever. Cujo the Clever it's not just one short story. I think that there are several stories of Cujo. It feels like Cujo is the antagonist, the protagonist that Jack Vance decided upon after the first few stories in the Dying Earth. And Cujo's tales are very meandering, and somewhere along the way it lost me, and I never really pushed past I think the second or third story of Cujo. Yeah.
Fair. Okay, so wait, hold on. Are you telling me that this is the one and only time that we see Guyal of Sfere and we never find out what's happening with the library and the museum?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah.
because the Dying Earth actually didn't even start with Guyal of Sfere. It starts with someone else. I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
A very
Turpin.
powerful, yes, something starting with
Yeah,
T.
yeah. Guyal of Sfere is actually the last story in the book.
Yeah.
Okay, well, my criticism has skyrocketed from I have problems to
They're,
wow. Okay,
they're
all
all,
right,
they're all
so
independent.
yeah, fair enough. But so let me just reconstruct this slightly before I go completely insane. The My literal end point to this podcast was going to be like, all right, it's a so and so out of 10. Let's see where he takes this. Let's see if he can salvage this and make this better somehow. Now knowing that this is it, um, yeah, gentlemen, I think this is a moment where um, if all right, I'll say it like this: the the world is beautiful. The moments and snippets are interesting. Each scene could make its own little story. You could really go on a tale about one or two situations within this and make a whole season of a TV show, right? I really think so. Each of those moments and those places, they are so evocative that there's a lot to explore. They're all paintings with so many details. Together, it's hung by duct tape, and the fact that there is no resolution towards the museum. So this is where we end. We end on this. Well, what could happen next to Guyal of Sfere and the knowledge he acquired? It makes the story actually like doesn't make any sense to me anymore. So this idea of knowledge never being explored after, it feels like the journey towards the success is ultimately pointless, and it doesn't teach our character anything. And when it comes to actual knowledge, actual reason for him to get there, so this MacGuffin, this Deus Ex Machina, begins to feel quite lazy because you could have done something else with Guyal of Sfere. The premise itself is great. The idea of a young man or a young woman or a young individual um, going out there and wanting to find out more about the world. It's a great setup. But knowing that the end of the story, where he is looking up into the stars and says like, "Oh, what are we gonna do with all this knowledge?" Now rings super hollow to me. It rings like there's actually like it's meaningless because although the message itself is great, it's not supported by the story. And for me, no matter how great the ingredients are, if they don't mesh together well enough for me, unfortunately, that's not a soup I want to eat again. So I'm actually kind of disappointed,
I
knowing that this is the
think
only tale.
I think if you look at so I this is just my personal opinion. But the Dying Earth, the main character of the Dying Earth is not any of the human characters in it. The main character of the Dying Earth is the Dying Earth itself. Because
Hmm.
when I read, I got like the same vibe that I got reading the Hunchback of Notre Dame as I did the Dying Earth, where actually a lot of the focus is actually spent on in the Hunchback of Notre Dame. A lot of the focus is actually spent on the cathedral itself, and and when I read the Dying Earth, it felt like the characters to me were the props. They were the props to showcase the Dying Earth, and if you were to read it not as an adventure story of Guyal going from point A to point B or Kujo overcoming this and that, but that they are just vehicles to bring you through this the Dying Earth. It might come across as different. I don't know, because for me when I read it, it was like if I took a step back and view the Dying Earth as the main character, then it did change the flavor of the adventure stories for me, to be honest, because then I become more keen to find out the sightseeing became more the sightseeing became more compelling to me once I decided to read it in that fashion.
I see. I
Yeah.
see. So I guess I have to treat the next story that we read by Jack Vance, if that ever happens, akin to the way I treat H.P. Lovecraft's work. In that case, the
Yeah, yeah.
scenery and the
I
mood
mean,
being
maybe
more important.
maybe. I mean, that's just the way I read the Dying Earth. I don't know if anybody would agree with me, because I feel like compared to the environment itself, like the Dying Earth itself, Jack Vance doesn't really spend a lot of time giving his characters a lot of depth, as much depth
I
as.
wanna I want to also say it's a really quick point, but the conversations with the curator and his way of speaking and Guile way of speaking um, in that whole scene was also very clunky for me. But it's just a very minor point. It might just be my personal ear, but it just kind of felt really unnatural the way they spoke to one another. Um, yeah, it's it's interesting. So if let me put it this way, I don't know if this will be better, XJ, the way you said it, right? Like I haven't tried it your way, but it can't be any worse than the way I read it.
Yeah.
Because the way I read it brought me no joy, and I thought to myself like, well, there's a part two, so maybe this will be salvaged in some way. It has a lot of
Mm,
interesting set pieces, but not
mm,
knowing that Guyal of Sfere is Guyal of One, I'm Guyal of Done.
mm. I would go along. I will go along with what you say, Nikki. I think you've got an absolute genius for picking out the wrong way to read a story. Um, it's really quite a talent. Quite a talent.
Thank you, Robert. All right, and you have a fantastic way of overlooking any actual criticism that could be levied against the work. It is
Oh,
also a
yeah,
fantastic
yeah.
talent.
I agree. I agree. Absolutely, because the end. What am I trying to say? The object of reading a story is to enjoy it. So whatever way you read it that ends up with you enjoying it is the right way to read it.
Well, let me put it this way. Um, it is the job of a book is to entertain you. It is not your fault that a book does not entertain you as a person. And I have Graham McNeil on my side on this one. So thank you very much. I'll take my winnings.
Well, it's all very well, but I'm. I have to say I'm not convinced by you or Mr. McNeil because there is there is the fact remains that you can have a story that's enjoyed much more by one person and by the other. And to me, it makes no sense at all
Hmm.
to have equality between not enjoying a story and enjoying it. To me, it what is the point of not enjoying a story? There's no
Well,
point at all.
it's not something that you choose. I think this is the core mechanism of this debate that I think is creates it impossible but rather interesting probably to hear for others. But for me, right, my point, the fact the deviation begins at inception here, my dear friend. I don't believe that there is a choice you make to read the story right or wrong. You
Well,
can
I
later understand why. Well, and you do see. So there
I
is
do
there is
because I've had experience of it in my own life. When I first read Clark Ashton Smith, I
mhm.
didn't like him at all, and now he's one of my favourite authors. So I'm like an ex-criminal who's turned into a policeman, and that I can see both sides of the law, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
Um,
yes, I understand, but personal
yeah.
experience in most debates, especially one of divine nature, such as reading, it's a hard pill to swallow. I will
I think
concede on the point that you feel that way.
if I can cut in here,
Yes.
the dying earth is actually, for me, is actually a point in Robert's favor, because to be honest, when I first read it, I didn't enjoy it at all until I decide to forget about the characters and focus instead on the scenery. Like it was a conscious decision to switch my way of reading. Like literally, it's like I'm not really enjoying this story so much, and then I decided, you know what, the environment seems a lot more interesting, so I'll just focus on that and forget about all the characters and their motivations instead, and
All right.
just sort of soak in first the language, the prose, the poetry of the prose, as well as the sightseeing. It's like I literally had to make that decision, that conscious decision, to focus on those two aspects of the dying earth, and then the story become a lot more palatable to me, because if I had to focus on the characters, they're like tin cans. They have that shape and then it's hollow inside, like
Well, but we know from the podcast that for me to enjoy a story, I have to have a character. And if I don't have a character, it's very hard for me to enjoy a story.
Exactly. That's
But hold on. Actually, I meet your bet, and I raise it with, all right, what's the right way to read the snows of Kilimanjaro to enjoy it?
We don't know.
We don't know.
None of us know. None of us know.
I'm not particularly.
This proves. Hold on. This proves that there are tales that no matter how you read them, you can't enjoy them.
Look, you I'm not trying to settle your debate one way or another. To me, it's quite hilarious. I'm just saying, in the dying earth, because to me it doesn't have to sit on a yes or no. It's not a black and white thing. The whole thing could be sitting on a spectrum. To me, but all I'm saying is, for the dying earth, I absolutely had that switch of mind. I absolutely did consciously switch from focusing on the characters and jumping into the environment instead, and that made it way more palatable to me, because like I read up until the second story of Guyal the Clever, I think. And I couldn't push past it anymore because I've just had about enough of the sightseeing. But I wouldn't even have been able to push past the first story if I had to have a character inside my story to carry the tale. I think the way I would answer both you and Robert is that there are everybody had individual taste, and within that spectrum of taste, a story might hit different notes. And if a story hit a note badly on one, you could decide to switch to focus on something else, which is what I absolutely did for the Dying Earth. When I read stories, the things that draw me in, first and foremost, the prose. If the prose is shit, I'm just gonna forget it. I'm gonna throw it away. The second thing is the world building, the environment. It has to be really well described. And only the last is the characters. The characters doesn't play such a big role. They just have to be consistent. Compelling or not is something else. But within this tree, I could decide to focus on one or the other. Like the Name of the Wind, the world building is not that compelling to me. The characters, aside from Kuvek, the main character, is not that well developed. I basically only focus on the prose. And the second book that came out, nothing hit the notes, and I just threw it away. So there are tastes within everybody. because everybody has a spectrum of taste, and then within a story might hit different notes, and you could decide to focus on it on one or the other. That's my take.
For sure. And thank you for your take, XJ. I think the catalyst of all this and why I vividly defended it this time was because in Robert's point, what I heard was maybe read better, right? But I think actually the fact that we have um, diverse ideas about the story, it has its niche of having these interesting debates within within the podcast. And to me, it's not actually about whether someone is right and wrong. So for me, whenever I have something that negative to say about a story that Robert likes, there's a lot of like back and forth where I don't necessarily think that Robert needs to defend the story in one way or another, or that his criticisms of my criticisms kind of even matter in a sense. And what I'm trying to say with that is, it ultimately, if someone felt a way about a story, that in itself is an interesting thing to analyze, and of course to understand and to further engross your scope. I'll make an example where I'm not the center of that, just so we can see it somewhere else. So the sequel um, to that Margin story that we read, No Place Like Home. Um, XJ, what's it called, saw within that tale something that neither I or Robert did, right? And we had a kind of a similar situation where Robert tried to kind of defend the story in some ways, shape, or form. And ultimately, that defense didn't really matter. And I think it didn't bring us anything. Because once we started to analyze actually what actually had found wrong with the story and what kind of personal feelings he had about it, is when we started to really unpack the tale and understand it better, right? So it's more like, to me, saying that something is read wrongly. It's like about at least in this context, if we're not arguing for the sake of arguing of the point of is there a way to read it wrong or not, I feel like if we keep focusing on that, we're going to have situations where we actually get away from what we're talking about, and the interesting point we could make, rather than dismiss the criticism as you read it wrong.
Well,
Do you
it's not a
understand me?
dismissal. It's not a dismissal. It's an enlargement of the debate, because there are two things which we're doing in these podcasts. We're discussing the story, which is fairly objectively in existence, and we're also discussing the process of reading, which is occurring in our heads. And they are overlapping topics, but they are also distinct, I think.
I see what you mean.
I
I,
think
I hear it as dismissal. Is I think my point.
I think I think
But you
it's
explained it.
I think the reaction is probably just to the word wrong, possibly, because I could give another example. Like, neither of you liked Stephen King. You remember that?
Look how gleeful XJ is whenever he brings malice and devastation to individuals he considers friends. I mean, look at that face of joy.
Sorry, what
Oh
were you
my god.
saying? What were you saying about Stephen King?
I think so. We read the Long Walk, didn't we? And
Oh,
none
that,
of us,
yeah.
neither you nor Nikki nor Cass liked the story. But for me, Stephen King is one of those, like, again, I had a very conscious decision to totally ignore Stephen King's plotting and just get into his
Yeah,
characters. His
yeah.
prose was enough for me to go on, and I absolutely could not stand his plotting. Like, his plot has so many holes that I've just decided to give up and not focus on the plots at all. But his characterizations are top notch. He really goes into each character, and I decided to focus on that. And again, it's like, I think what Robert is trying to say is that sometimes you can consciously decide to only focus on one part of a story, and that could change how you enjoy the story. I don't think, I think the unfortunate choice of description in this case is just the word wrong.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think the word wrong presses the wrong buttons. But
So to speak.
I'm always right.
Nevertheless,
No, I mean, sometimes we use words that just hits. Sometimes we use words that just doesn't carry over, translate too well to the other side, and we have to think about a different way to phrase ourselves, right? But I think I might have described what Robert has in mind, at least the general shape of it. Like you could consciously decide to ignore all the stuff that doesn't work for you, and then just focus on the stuff that it's kind of like you were describing this sumptuous feast of steak and asparagus, and I hate asparagus, but maybe I can push the asparagus to one side and focus on the steak instead, something like that.
I think
I get what you mean.
you're just eating it wrong, XJ. That's the thing. You would like us to
You see what I mean? This is who you chose to be in bed with, XJ. This is your friend.
Robert is just giving me a sarcastic dig.
Yes, I know.
Look at the grin on his face.
Yes, I know what he's doing, and I'm adding to the situation because I think it's rather more hilarious that way. But all right, folks, I think we've had enough for this day. The continuous battle versus can you read something not correctly. Let's fuck. Really, this is the only time we really look at Guyal of Sfere. What a disaster! All right, so my score for the work I will reveal in a second, but here is my quick workshop way to fix the story. Super quick. Like, honestly, this one thing, if it was there, I would have no problem with it. Have Guyal be given something from the library at the beginning that helps him, and have the knowledge be the combined strength of his wit and the information in this thing from the library that keeps him afloat in this terrible times. Not every time, but in the moments where it matters. And that way you could both connect the dots of how the father knows about this museum, this library, and you could make the end of the tale feel better, feel like the points are connected. The end. As far as my review of the thing goes, the dying Earth universe gets a 8 out of 10. The Guyal of Sfere as a story gets a 5 out of 10.
I actually can go with that scoring. Yeah. The description of the environment itself gets very high marks from me. 8.5 would be around the right mark. Guyal of Sfere himself, yeah, maybe 5 or 6. Yeah, something like that.
All right. So which variation of 10 out of 10 do you give this one, Robert?
I would have given it 10 out of 10 if it hadn't been for the somewhat, shall we say, obscure goings on in the library, the sort of technical side of it, which I found it difficult to follow. So I would reduce it to 9.5 out of 10. I think the just to have a quick list of things which I didn't manage to have time to say, which partly explain why I give it such a high score. I think there's quite a lot of humour in Jack Vance. The humour in this story was mostly with the Yorgia, the fortune teller. There's a lot of elegiac laments for the past, which I thought were part of the general sort of power of the scene of the scenario, and lots of hints that lots of tantalizing hints of other things which aren't explained in the story. Jack Vance keeps doing that in all his fiction, and the Jack Vance speak I sort of a special kind of English dialogue called Jack Vance speak, one could say, is very humorous in itself. It's in a way it's very stilted. All his characters tend to speak in a way which ultra, you feel everybody in his universe is ultra educated the way they speak. And I find that very humorous and distinctive. And the contrast between that and the occasional moments of stark terror are very very impressive. So yeah, 9.5 out of 10.
All right. We have our scoring. Do we have any last words for Guyal of Sfere?
I hope the next Jack Vance story is better. Otherwise, I'm never reading them again.
Fair enough. All right. So if you enjoyed the discussion and you like the podcast, please like and subscribe and all of that. And then until next week, see you all.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.